Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we're going to have a really fun event. We're going to be chatting with some current medical students, answering your questions, really getting to some of those questions you might not have any other outlets to ask right now. So first of all, we're just glad that you're here. We're glad that you've decided to join us. I know there's not a ton of folks out there right now that are in this mode where they're waiting to start med school for the fall, but if you've already been accepted to med school, go ahead and let us know in the chat so we can celebrate along with you, because what an exciting time and an exciting moment, and congratulations to all of you who are in fact going to be starting your M1 this fall. Again, my name is Liz. I've been a Kaplan MCAT teacher for 12 years, so we're really excited to be here with you. And then I'm joined today by 3 current medical students, and they're going to take a chance to just introduce themselves, tell us just a little bit about what you studied in undergrad, and then what year you are in med school and at which one. So let's start with Amanda. So Amanda, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Hi, all. I'm Amanda, and I graduated from Indiana University Bloomington in Indiana in 2011, and I currently attend Marion College of Osteopathic Medicine in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm an M2.
Great. And Annika?
Hi, I'm Annika. I'm an M1 at GW in DC. I went to Santa Clara University for undergrad, where I studied public health. And last year I finished my master's in physiology at Georgetown.
Great. And Paige?
Hi guys, my name is Paige. I am currently an M1 at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. I did my undergraduate at the University of Connecticut undergrad campus in biomedical engineering.
Great. Well, we're really excited to have all of you here. And the main thing that I think is on everyone's mind right now is, of course, COVID and just all the disruption that's going on. So if I could just start with you, Annika, if you could just say a little bit about how everybody's talking about it at your school and sort of what some of those impacts have been for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've had to make that transition recently from being in class and being in person and learning clinical skills to online. So it's definitely been a little bit of a switch, but we're adapting and the learning continues and the lectures are online and we're finding ways to move the clinical skills online as well.
And Amanda, I don't know what your study life has been like, but how hard has it been to kind of stay motivated at home? And do you have any tips kind of on that end of things?
It's difficult, like you wouldn't believe. Having to set your own schedule. I don't have to be at school for anything. There are no more mandatory classes. Everything's online. And so it's a little bit harder, but getting friends who are in class with me to check in with me, that's been really helpful. Making a schedule for myself, making a to-do list, and being able to check those things off have been extremely helpful.
What about you, Paige? Do you have any other tips to add on?
Yeah, kind of just echoing what they said. Our school's coming out with emails. I mean, daily is an understatement. It's like hourly at this point with new changes and the things that they're trying to do to get us up to speed, to get all those M3s, M4s and their clinicals up to speed. I know like match day was a big thing for our school, trying to figure out how to celebrate our 4th years without, allowing them to congregate and really celebrate the way that match day is supposed to be. So it's been an adjustment, and I think that's true across more than just medical school. But being that medical school is a very hands-on curriculum, it's been particularly difficult for us.
Yeah, and I'm sure everyone here can resonate with that. Life has changed quite a lot in the last couple of weeks, and I think the main thing that we're going to try to focus our attention on tonight is just really like best case scenario, right? Like we go into the fall and life is back to normal. So one of the things that I was just thinking about today, Annika, was what were some of those like kind of almost misconceptions you had about med school? Like anything that you kind of went into med school thinking it would be like this and you were like, wow, actually, this is really different. What comes to mind when I ask that?
I felt like my classmates would be like more highly competitive, but it's been a really collaborative group. It's really easy to find people to study with. And I'm in a bigger class. We have about 180 students in my class. And from the get-go, we were put into small groups. So I have a small group with 9 people, and we have 2 physicians assigned to our group, and we meet with that group pretty consistently, at least like 2 to 3 times a week. And I think we formed like a really strong bond, and I find myself studying with that group really often. And it's just been like a really good like connection to have. And I think it's been a little more collaborative, I have to say, than any other part of my education, which really surprised me and it's been really nice.
That's wonderful to hear. Paige?
Absolutely the same thing. I say this, I'm one of the student interviewers for kids who come in interview for our campus. And that's honestly my answer to this question every time is the people is what surprised me the most for exactly the same reason. I expected it to be very competitive. And we have a whole group chat of our class where it's just like, oh, does anyone have this resource? Or does anyone have a study guide for this class? And within 5 minutes, you'll get an answer. So it's been really nice to, have that support around you when you're going through such a difficult curriculum.
Amanda, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say the exact same thing. I thought it was going to be a real go-getter, gunner. I thought I was going to be like pretty much like by myself studying and trying to figure everything out, but the people have been absolutely amazing. And it's really a really great growing environment. Everybody wants to help everybody else.
I think that's so interesting because, some of folks here may have seen some of the admissions events that we've done. And when we talk to admissions committees, they're always looking for people who are team players because medicine is teamwork, right? You're always working together in teams. And so I think it's an interesting misconception, right? Like that we think, it's going to be this individual effort. And it is obviously a lot of individual effort that's a lot of hard work, but at the same time, that the culture is so much more supportive is a wonderful, wonderful thing to hear. Let's talk a little bit about like the transition in terms of what are some of the things you had to do to study differently? And anyone can answer this, but if, kind of how did your studying mentality or ways of studying just sort of have to morph over time?
Yeah, I mean, I have kind of an answer to this one, I guess. For me personally, it was definitely volume of studying was the highest change. I was able to kind of skate through undergrad with, the minimal effort required, more or less. And that totally changed. The way our curriculum works is you do all of your learning ahead of time and come to class like prepared with that knowledge to use it for what we call application exercises, where you can actually use the knowledge and expand upon it. So just like being expected to know everything before you show up is pretty difficult, especially in some areas of medicine. They're more difficult to learn by yourself than others. So it's a kind of constant adjustment. You may be great at renal and you may really struggle with neuro or vice versa. You just kind of have to figure out what works best for you and stick with it, but be willing to change as it goes along.
I definitely agree with that. I think the volume just going into med school is different than like any other leg of my education has been. We just have like a solid 4 hours of lecture without fail every single day. And then just like clinical skills on top of that after school, after those lecture hours, and just getting ready to like be ready to learn every single day and really make the most out of the weekends to absorb the material. And I think for me also like incorporating outside resources has definitely been something new because throughout undergrad and even my master's program, there really wasn't like outside resources that you were using other than studying for the MCAT, of course, but now really like utilizing outside resources during lecture-based material too. It's definitely a skill to kind of build upon.
I would agree with that. In terms of using other resources, when I got to med school, I suddenly had to figure out how not only to get all this volume into my head, but also to make it last a little bit longer term than one semester because everything builds on itself. And so the second semester I have to draw from what I learned in the first semester. I'm in my second year and we're still going back to things that I learned on the first year. And so using like every different kind of resource that I can try to figure out, moving to flashcards, going quizzing with my friends, going by myself and drawing stuff and using all types of different websites and stuff. It's an adjustment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Go ahead.
I'm always getting like bit by the immunology that's coming back during every trying to remember all those sketchy weeks.
You can't get away from it. It always comes back.
Very true.
That's awesome. Well, I think one of the things that a lot of people are asking is just really like, is this your life? Like with that volume of schooling, like, is this like the only thing that you do in your week? Or are you able to kind of squeeze in other things? And if you can, like, what kinds of things are you able to squeeze in for sanity's sake?
Yeah, I think the answer to your question is both yes and no. You kind of take it on as if it's your life, but you quickly learn, at least in my case, that if you plan your time well and use your time well, you can do things outside of just medical school. I think it's kind of a different time for us right now. Me personally, I'm actually home with my family, so it's when their workday ends around 5, I'm like, oh, I think it's time to clock out from my work, and it can be a little bit tough because I want to play cards with them or go outside with them. But it's all about making sure that you get what you need to done, and then whatever that extra time is. I'd say I usually have a good, like, minimally, I know this sounds kind of low, but like 10 hours to myself per week for going to the gym or just vegging on the couch, whatever you want to do at that time. It exists. You just have to make it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think med school is just like ebbs and flows throughout, and some weeks are harder than others. There'll be a really rough exam week, but then there's one week where it's just not so bad, and you can kind of get in those exercise classes or whatever you wanted to do. I think I'm still able to like do a lot of the things that I love to do outside of school. It's just a matter of sometimes like making the commitment a little bit shorter. Like I love to work out and go to gym classes, but I might not have the time to like go to a studio class, so I can still squeeze in like a 30-minute run as needed.
Echoing both Anika and Paige, you have to make the time, really. You have to like find that little bit of time, or really adjust your scheduling, but it's there and you have to take it. You have to.
I was going to ask you that, Amanda. Do you feel like you're getting better at that now that you're an M2? Like, do you feel like you're getting better at sort of defending your U time, or do you feel like you're still kind of fighting the battle back and forth?
There are definitely days that I cede to studying and it wins, and that has to happen. There are things that I need to get done, and so there are things that I need to say no to. But there are also mental breaks that I need to take from medicine and med school and everything that's going on. So I am definitely better about it this year than I was last year. Last year, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but M1's year can kind of feel like you're very much drowning. And so this year I'm like right here. I can breathe with my nose and my mouth. Yeah.
That's good to hear. And I think one of the questions we have coming in from the chat is kind of like, all right, we're talking about studying a lot. Like, how many hours a day, how many hours a week are we actually talking about? Can you guys estimate that for us?
Sure. I would say for me, it kind of depends the way our curriculum is. We basically go 10 weeks between having exams. So in week 1, maybe closer to like 40 hours a week, which is really low. You're putting in the minimum amount because you just got off a big exam and you're not quite ready to jump back in yet. Week 10, I'd say it's probably closer to 100 hours minimum. So it really, and I think that depends on your schedule and your personality as well.
Yeah, so right now my classes are, we have an exam every other Friday. So everything's kind of smashed. Right now, I'm also studying, kind of like working up to studying for my board. So my studying is a little bit heavier scheduled right now. But I usually do, in terms of days, maybe like school lectures, about 4 hours a day. And for boards, maybe like 5 or 6.
I think for me, it's just really varied. I thought like immunology was really, really challenging, but right now we went through cardiology and we just finished that, and that felt a little bit lighter in terms of like memorization, so the hours were less. But I'd agree with what you said about like, as you get closer to the test, it feels like 100 hours a week, but in the beginning on like week 1, it's like, okay, this feels manageable at like a 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
Let's take a break from the med school discussions for a minute and kind of put yourself in the shoes. We've got over half of our audience is still kind of in the pre-med life pretty solidly and really thinking through like getting ready for medical school. So I'd like to actually start with, are there any classes that you wish you had taken or wish you had, kind of talking about like floating through a little bit, like wish you had really mastered more for the purposes of, having a little bit of an easier M1. So how about that one?
For me, when I did my master's in physiology, I thought that really, really helped me. I can imagine if if I had had to make the transition just from undergrad to this med school level, I think without that like grounded physiology base, I would have had a difficult time. So I think maybe if you're still an undergrad and you're able to squeeze in a physiology class and get those basics down, just because I think those first few weeks of med school, they move very, very fast and you're still trying to make friends and adjust to a new city. So I do think like having a strong physiology base could really be helpful.
Yeah, I will definitely echo that. I did come straight out of undergrad, so I'm not quite sure about the classes I wish I had taken, but the classes I'm definitely incredibly glad that I did take, or definitely anatomy. I took an intro to immunology class, which I think has been hugely helpful. It was, we learned about B and T cells over the course of like 3 months versus 3 hours that you get in med school to spend on it. And then like biochemistry, making sure you have a really good basis in biochemistry, because that's another thing that they're not going to spend time to walk you through all the steps of the TCA cycle and everything, but you should have a good understanding and background knowledge before you try to learn any more.
I think that physiology would have been helpful, but I slightly disagree in that I'm not sure that I would recommend that any undergrads take a specific class, just because if you took like let's say histology or anatomy, I mean, it's great for like those portions of the classes that you're going to be learning, but there's so much else to learn. And the school that you go to, they're going to teach you what they want you to know, which is going to be enough for you to pass your boards, knock on wood. No, it definitely will be. And so in my personal opinion, I think that if you take what you really enjoy, then that's a really great thing. And then just be ready to work in med school, which you have to be ready to work anyway. So everyone who gets into med school, they're going to be taught by their med school exactly what they need to know. And there are plenty of resources. So don't like take something that you don't want to just because you think it's going to look good.
Yeah, I love that advice. And I think there's a good underlying theme of, especially as we're looking at applications, we've got a lot of questions coming in about applications, but I get questions sometimes like, is it better to take this class, but I might get, a B in it, or is it better to take that class? And, all these questions. And I think there's a piece where it's just like, what excites you? If you're meeting the requirements of going to medical school, then beyond that, it's more about, who you are and what you want to, what excites you, what makes you want to study hard. Tell us a little bit about how you guys studied for the MCAT and just, kind of what your journey was. I know a lot of folks are asking questions about that. How long did it take? Kind of what was your thought process around all that?
MCAT was so long ago. I think for me, I believe I signed up for a class. I had like these MCAT books, and I was working while I was getting ready to study for the MCAT. And I think I took about a month or two to really get into MCAT stuff. Before then, I was reading like a chapter of something a night or something like that, and then take practice exams.
I'd say I spent about like 2.5 to 3 solid months just studying, and I'd taken a Kaplan course. Actually, that's kind of how I got involved with Kaplan. It was a tough time, I will say. Like studying for the MCAT is just not fun. It's like the lengthiest test you've taken to that point. I say, we have some like underclassmen in this track too as well. And I say if you're in your freshman year, sophomore years, just really focus in on your science classes and get those basics down the first time. Having a really solid understanding, I think during your undergrad will really help when you get to that MCAT. And just being patient with yourself while you are studying and just trust the process, because your score will go up from those like early practice test scores.
Yeah, I would not recommend studying the way that I did. I was really bad at procrastinating. I kind of set my date pretty early, and it was right after winter break of my junior year. So right when we came back from winter break. So I told myself that I would start studying in the fall along with all my other classes. But I was taking like 4 lab classes at the time. And so I did not really have the time or the motivation to open my MCAT books after all of my classwork was done. So I didn't start studying until like 5 weeks out from my exam date. And I studied probably 16 to 18 hours a day for 5 weeks straight. While I was on campus, no one was around. So I like did not talk to anyone else for several weeks, and then finally reemerged into society after my exam. It paid off. I did well. But I would give yourself more time, especially if you're not willing to give up like a good month and a half of your life to solely study.
Yeah, we often say you want to aim to have at least 300 hours. Doing them in 4 weeks is a little crazy. But we had a specific question that I'll address, just having taught folks for 12 years and prepared them for the MCAT. It was just talking about like, is it smart to do that right now? And I feel like if your life is pretty like you've got to stay inside and you've got fewer things going on in your life, I think it's a great time for you to be able to, if you're in a situation which is much more chaotic because of everything that's been going on. Maybe you've got more people in your house, or maybe it's harder to do. Maybe right now isn't the right time for you to study for the MCAT. So I think there's some considerations there just about, are you going to be able to find, a quieter place to be, someplace that you can actually focus and study? I know that, I have some friends who have some extra family members that kind of got stuck with them, so their life is a little extra hectic. Other folks might find themselves in a place where they have a lot of extra time. So if you do have some extra time, for sure, give it to the MCAT. It's one of the most powerful things you can do to improve your med school application, really get it on the table in front of somebody. So I would for sure recommend spending some time working on that. And we've got obviously a lot of great resources for you out there. I'd like to kind of just focus back on looking at like a day in the life of, M1 year, and even just kind of covering what types of coursework you're doing, and, kind of give us that overview of what that year is meant to accomplish, really. Annika, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. So right now we just are finishing up our CPR block, which is cardio, pulmonary, and renal. And I say like a day in the life. So we have lecture every day from 8 a.m. to 12 noon. And that's all recorded. So that is your choice, whether you want to go to class and do it there or do it at home. And I've kind of switched off back and forth. Sometimes I'm not able to get up at 8 a.m. and be in class at 8 a.m. And sometimes it's really nice that we get it done by noon. We have noon to 1 reserved every single day as a free-hour lunch hour. We usually have like different talks going on at my school that you can go to, or different club meetings during that hour. And then I'd say from at least like 1 to 3, 1 to 4 every day, there's usually some type of clinical skills. We have FOSCEs where we have standardized patients come in and we get to practice clinical skills in that way. And at GW, we're also very public health focused. So we do take a public health course as well. And so that's something that could happen in the afternoons, and every day is a little bit different at GW. And that's one thing I definitely had to adjust from undergrad, is just having like a different schedule every single day. But I'd say by like 5 o'clock at the latest, we're usually done, and we're able to kind of go home and study at that point and kind of be done for the day. And so I usually like to give myself a little bit of a break at that point, and then just kind of hit the books after that and hopefully try and get a workout in.
Yeah, ours is a little bit different. So we're currently, I don't even know what this block is all about, but right now we're learning about like oral pathology and anatomy and oral cancers. And then we have a little bit of like neuro in this block. So it's kind of all over the place because our curriculum is based around patient cases and not necessarily like your typical organ systems, which is nice and a little bit difficult at times because we tend to go back and revisit a lot of organ systems very repetitively, which is good for like keeping it in your brain, but it can get a little daunting when you look at your schedule for the block and you have like 8 topics that you're covering. So we don't have any lectures at our school. It's kind of like our school's pride and joy is having all team-based learning. So what you do is you do all of your learning prior to coming to class. You have online resources, textbooks, videos made from professors or other sources, and you do all that prep work. You come to class, you take a quiz by yourself, you take a quiz with your team, and then you go into what's called application exercises, and they'll put up a little vignette about a patient or a case, and then ask you questions about it. And you have time to work with your team about what the question is about, present your answer, and then the class has a huge discussion about what's the right answer, why did you choose a different answer. So it's really meant to like solidify that whole problem solving aspect of medicine as well. So we usually have like anywhere from 2 to 6 hours of class a day, I would say, and the rest of the time is really spent outside of class preparing for your next couple classes. And then always, time to eat. There's always time to eat. There's always time to, I usually get at least like an hour workout in a day. Some days I don't, some days I can do longer than that, but that's what I aim for personally.
Well, I'm an M2, so I don't know if I want to go into my day.
Well, I'd love to hear actually, Amanda, like how your, since we kind of have two different learning systems that we've heard, like how did your school approach it? Was kind of more of the traditional lecture approach, or was there a different way of presenting the material?
So mine actually, when Aneka was like, yeah, we do FOSCEs, I was like, oh my gosh, we do OSCEs. Same thing though with standardized patients. And so mine, I think, was a little bit more similar to hers. We had probably about 4 hours of lecture in the morning. And then you do, in my school, I will go to an osteopathic medical school. So we have an osteopathic lab, and then we have like regular clinical skills that everybody learns. So the days switch off with that. And those usually last from like 1 to 4-ish, Monday through Friday.
And actually, I'd like to just kind of pause since we've seen like some good differences here and just kind of say like, how did you choose your school? Like what excited you about applying to that school? Because I know a lot of people are going to be in that mode of either preparing applications or choosing what schools they're going to apply to, and just sort of what, what excited you? What made you want to end up applying for the schools you did apply to?
That's a really good question. I think for me, I love DC, so I really did want to stay kind of in a bigger city. And then I came from a really strong public health background from undergrad, and I was really excited about the fact that we had a really integrated public health curriculum at my school. Once every semester, we get to kind of do a summit where we focus on a problem at hand. And so like during my first semester, we focused on HIV and increasing resources in the community in DC, and it was just really cool to come together as a class and be able to put together a proposal and actually present it up at the Capitol building. So that was a really, really neat experience. And so those things were really big to me. And I did kind of want more of a traditional lecture-based style learning. I think I've always kind of been used to that, and I just wanted that to stay the norm for me. So I think those things really excited me about GW.
I have to say I'm fairly opposite of what Annika has to say. I'm not a city girl. I knew that I did not want to be in a city. So our campus is kind of like 10 miles outside of a city. I'm situated more in a rural area, which I really liked because I love to get out and hike and do outdoor activities. So that was a big factor for me. On top of that, I had done research at UConn's Health Center while I was an undergrad, and I really fell in love with the people there and the resources that they had. I didn't really know much about the med school going in, but when I went in for my interview day, our admissions officer was like the most enthusiastic man I've ever met in my entire life. And he really just made me super hyped about team-based learning. And coming from an engineering background, a lot of what we did was team-based. I will say that what we do is structured a little differently, but the whole working as a team aspect and ditching the old style of lectures was very appealing to me because I like to go at my own pace and spend time on what I want to spend time on and not necessarily be stuck in a 4-hour lecture on something that I feel really confident in. So that was a huge factor for me, as well as like the location and being close to family and stuff. So
mine is kind of in the middle of you guys. So I'm in school in Indianapolis, which is a city, but it's not a huge city. And we're surrounded by a lot of rural parts of Indiana. So we do get kind of like the big city feels and connections, but also we do talk a lot about primary care and rural care and the types of people that we might be serving in a state like Indiana. And I actually applied to Marian, where I go now, because it's in my state, and I had friends in Indy, and I like had a place to stay for the interview. And then I got there and I absolutely loved it. I loved everything about it. The school, everybody who interviewed me when they talked about the curriculum, and I was totally sold.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about DO and like some of the differences, and then also just as far as like future career path. And I know a lot of students have questions about the differences and similarities and all of those types of things.
Sure. So I go to a DO school, but I've never gone to an MD school, so I can only talk about what I know and what I've talked about with friends of mine who went to MD schools. And it sounds to me like the biggest difference is that I take a class, which is osteopathic principles and practices, and that's about it. So the biggest difference is that I also learn osteopathic medicine, and then we do have an osteopathic lecture, like with each systems course that I take, about how osteopathic medicine can apply to the respiratory system or the cardiac system, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's really interesting. I personally really like it. And when I talk to people who don't really know about the difference, I kind of say it's an extra tool in my doctor tool bag that I can pull out and use, in addition to what you think traditionally of in medicine, like pharmacology or something like that.
That's great. That's helpful. I know this is a big piece of life, going, just reality speaking, but we have a question coming in from the chat about med school student loan debt and just how to manage it. How have you thought about it? How have you talked about it with your friends and family? I'd love to hear your response to that.
Yeah, so you're gonna have it. There is no escaping that. You can try to manage how much, but in the end, it's gonna be a lot, regardless of what a lot means to you. I have talked to attendings who are in their 40s and they still carry their student loans with them. And that's okay because they still have lives outside of it. You have to be cognizant of it and you can't take it for granted, I guess. But as long as you plan, and I would say every med school that I interviewed at was really good about having their financial counselors there as a resource for you to figure out how much debt can you take on, how are you going to manage it, can you get scholarships, can you get grants. I mean, they're really there to like make it easier on you, so take advantage of that. But other than that, like, you're there to focus on school. If this is something that you are really passionate about, you'll make it through. So you just kind of have to have that mindset and like, don't open your loan servicer website. Just don't look at it. It'll make you really sad. Just don't.
Yeah, to echo what Paige is saying, you are going to have it, and it's just a fact of life, and everyone around you has it too, and everybody's living on a budget, and one day you won't be living on as much of a budget, but live within your budget, I guess.
Fair enough. We've got a lot of questions that are specific to some applications, and I just want to mention we do have some really great admissions focused events that are going to be coming up. So in a couple weeks on a Wednesday night, same time, we're going to be talking with 2 admissions consultants about personal statement, and we'll of course be able to address some of these specific types of questions as well. So I'm seeing questions about things like, what you change in your applications, how many schools you applied to, how heavy your extracurriculars are, et cetera. And I'd love to just plug those events because we'll be talking with folks who have 25 years of experience reviewing applications and making those decisions. It's always great to get anecdotal stories as well about applications. So what I'm actually thinking about is the next step for you guys. Like, I think as undergrads, like, we understand what's important, right? We know that we need to get our GPA, we need to hit all of our prereqs, we need to get a solid MCAT score, have some leadership opportunities, shadowing, volunteer work, research, etc. But like, what does success look like for a med student? Right? Like, what are those kinds of things that are going to help you to be able to get a good residency and really put your career on the path that you're interested in pursuing?
It's the ultimate question. What makes your application look better? A lot of students in my class, myself included, are kind of taking a look at that kind of stuff to apply to our ERS application, which is the application you use for residency. And unfortunately, my answer is the same for undergrads who are like, well, how do I get a step up and stand out for medical school? It really depends on what you like and what you want to do. If you don't want to go into research, maybe don't do research. And if you're not really interested in shadowing a certain type of medicine because you don't want to go into that kind of medicine, then don't shadow, like shadow something that you're very interested in. And so I would say really to figure out what you really like and then get involved with what you really like, because then not only do you have that portion of your application, but you can talk about it and you can talk about it passionately. And people all look the same on paper. Like everybody who applies to medical school, you're all going to look the same on paper. You are numbers. And when you get into the interview, that's your chance to be able to really say, this is who I am, and this is what I can offer you, and what can you offer me? And so the same thing I think is going to apply going forward, or so I've been told, is to really try to stand out by doing things that you really like doing, because you can make conversation about it. And you can say, I really understand this, and I'm really interested in going into this. Because if you do something just because you're told that you have to do it, you might not enjoy it. And then on top of like not being really into what you're doing, you're just like, you're not having a good time. You're not happy. And you really have to maximize that happiness when you're in med school. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% echo everything Amanda says. I think it's most important to have something that you're passionate about and stick with it. And I think that's definitely true of undergrad. As a student interviewer for my campus, that's like one of the only things I look for in your application, because I want to read something and be as passionate about it as like you are, or hear you and be as passionate about it as you are. But if you come across as someone who just kind of went at med school like trying to check off the box, like, yes, I did research. Yes, I did shadowing. We can see that, and it's not helpful for you. Like you really want to love what you do. And if that's not research, like that's okay. People get into med school all the time and don't do research, or people get into med school all the time and weren't even a science like major. Like you just do what you are really passionate about. For example, I have a classmate of mine who was a dance major, and he was super into dance, and that was his passion, and like somehow that brought him into like physics, and then he got really interested in immunology, and now he's an MD PhD student at our school. Like you'll get there no matter like if you're passionate about it, you will get there. So just like try to enjoy the time that you spend working to get there, because you don't get that time back.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what both of you said, because I interview students as well at my campus, and it makes me really interested in your story when you tell me about something that you're passionate about, even if it's a little like one-off from typical med school activities. I know during like my undergrad time and my research years, I like spent a lot of time doing social science research, which had a lot of it had nothing to do with medicine, but being able to talk about something that was a little bit different in my interviews, I think helped me a lot. And in general, like you guys have both been saying, just spend your time doing something you actually like doing, because like the process is a marathon to get through, get into med school and get through it. So definitely not a sprint. So you just have to pick things that you can actually keep doing with.
Let's talk a little bit about what you used as you were like doing your application, and like how you chose which professors or other folks that you asked for recommendations, and some of those pieces. As you can think about, a lot of folks are in that mode, and it might even be a little bit more challenging contacting them via email at this point, but definitely looking at some of those questions coming in from the chat.
I'd say when you're sending those emails and asking those letters of recommendation, it's best to seem like very prepared. And I think definitely providing your CV in advance, maybe even providing a list of all the work that you've done with this person, because professors are just so busy. They're probably going to forget about all the things you've done with them. So having a nice little like reminder for them would be helpful, because they'll be sure to include all that stuff, good stuff in your letter then. I think just having like a very planned and careful email to really show that like you've thought this decision through med school is for you, and like it'll show, and they'll be a little bit more passionate about writing your letter as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like in choosing who you are going to ask for a letter of recommendation to, like 100% go for someone that you've interacted with before. We used to have professors who would stand in the front of a 200, 300 person lecture and say like, I won't write you a letter of recommendation unless you come to office hours or something like that, which makes sense because they want to be able to write you a strong letter of rec. It's not going to help you if it's not a strong letter of rec. So like, you know, build, if there's a professor you are interested in having a letter of recommendation from, if you're a freshman, if you're a sophomore, like keep that in the back of your mind. Go try to make a connection with that professor because it will serve you really well down the line when your letter of rec stands out with very specific examples of your skills or your strengths. Because you can tell too when a letter of rec was written based on, you know, this, I had this student in my 200 person lecture, they were in the top X% of my class. That's not as personal, and we don't learn as much from you as if it comes from someone who really does know you and knows your passion and can speak to that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And in terms of like writing the emails, I remember when I wrote my emails to my professors, and I'm a non-traditional student too, so I was writing emails to professors who had taught me years before. And I only chose professors who I had interacted with and like had a conversation with, a one-on-one conversation. And then in my email, I put a little anecdote of like, I remember like you talked about this in class and we joked about it, or I brought up this point in that one class and it caused a great discussion. And so kind of like giving them that in to say, this is who I am. Do you remember me? And then I always ask the question, are you willing and able to write me a strong recommendation? Because that gives them the option to say no. And what you really don't want is somebody who doesn't want to give you a recommendation, write you a recommendation. Hard pass on that. I know somebody who does.
Absolutely.
Be personal.
Well, one thing I really like about what Amanda just said is like you're doing the heavy lifting, right? You're not putting the burden onto the professor, the letter writer. You're saying, I'm going to spend my time thinking up those stories. I'm going to put them together in a meaningful way to help spark that memory and be able to help that person write a better one. A few other recommendations we've heard before is there's you know, for the application, there's sort of the character qualities and sort of skills and attributes list. And so you can kind of like include that along with your CV and the letter writing. And so then it gives the like kind of an anchor. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever tried to write a review about someone or like feedback on someone. And if you don't have any context, it's sort of like, you know, so as soon as you give them that framework, they can say much more meaningful things using stronger adjectives and, you know, concrete pieces to build that more effectively. Yeah. We've got a lot of questions about the financial piece when we were talking about loans. So questions about, are scholarships a thing? Is, you know, in-state versus out-of-state a thing? Is there a chance to be able to have income while you're in med school? So I'd love to kind of hit on some of this financial concern.
Yeah, so I go to an in-state school and our tuition is significantly reduced over out-of-state students. So that definitely exists. And I would say if your state does have a medical school, consider it. As far as scholarships, every school is a little bit different. Some of them offer them directly. A lot of outside organizations offer scholarships. And if you have a good financial aid office, usually they'll post them for you or give you the links to those so that you can go and apply if they are relevant to you. It's not like undergrad, I would say. It's not as easy to find scholarships. They're not really just like laid out in your lap. You kind of have to be more active about it. But they exist. And then there's other things too, like there's grants that your institution can give you. There's financial aid as there is in undergrad if, you know, if that's something that you qualify for. So it exists. It's not as robust as it is in undergrad, but you can make it.
One thing I guess I didn't know about as well is that during that first year, a lot of people choose to do research in the summertime. And there are a lot of grants, both typically from your institution and from like other like dermatology societies or pediatric societies that are willing to fund medical student summer research programs. And so that's something like if you are interested in research, I'd really suggest like trying to seek out those mentors early because a lot of the grants are due by like January and February. So it's a really good way to get your summer funded.
And in terms of like having a job while you're in med school, depending on the type of student you are, it may be doable. I would advise anyone who's trying to get a part-time job while in medical school to get into school and start figuring out how to study and what your class is going to look like and see if you can work around that to earn some extra money because like when you're in medical school, that is your job, is to be a good student and to score well. And that's an investment of your time. And you don't want to be giving up an hour that you could have spent mastering material to earn, I don't know, 15, 20 bucks at like a grocery store or something like that. It's not worth your time. Your time is valuable.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you mentioned there, Amanda, made me think, a lot of folks in it may be aware of like the MCAT, but maybe not as aware of like USMLE. And so can you just walk us through like what those are? And like, I know there's some recent changes, so people might have seen like headlines. And so if we can kind of just get some context around that.
Sure. The boards. Step 1 is really ruling my life right now, so I know all about it. So for MD students, their step 1 boards are the USMLE. For me, I'm also taking the COMLEX. That's the DO version of step 1. I'm actually taking both. And they're an extremely important exam that these scores going to follow you throughout your career, unfortunately. You'll use it to apply for residency. You'll use it to apply again for a fellowship. And then you'll use it on all of your applications as well to get a job. And basically, step 1 is an accumulation. It's an exam over everything that you learn your first 2 years of medical school. I totally lost track of your question.
No, you did great. That's really, really helpful. So what kinds of things are going to be, you said it's accumulation. So is it mostly content? Is it application to patient cases? Like, how is it structured?
So the USMLE and the COMLEX, they're both turning more towards clinical-based questions. So the content is all there, and the way that the questions are written, they'll present like a patient with a certain they'll give you a clinical vignette with a patient, and then it'll be like a second or third order question. So they'll say this patient presents with this. And when you read it, you're like, oh, I know what that is. But the question isn't, what is it? It's like, how do you treat it? Or what's causing this? Or what carries the bug that causes this? And so it's really kind of like you have to master the content and then pile it on top of each other and learn how it looks under a bunch of different layers. And you can do it. I can do it.
Absolutely. I mean, and I guess the question now becomes, as we think about the M1 year, like obviously that's kind of a little bit further away thinking about the step 1, but yet everything you're learning this year is so important. So kind of how do you think about that? How do you wrap those pieces around for the M1s?
I think that's a really good question. For me, I have bought like that first aid book, which I have sitting right next to me. And I think a really good tip that I've gotten is just to annotate it continuously while you're going through your curriculum. So you have a really good study guide when you go into your dedicated step time. So that's been really helpful for me. I know some of my friends really like the flashcard method to keep up with knowledge from previous kind of sections. That hasn't worked so well for me. I don't really love it, but I think for me, just having getting familiar with outside resources, but also not being overwhelmed because there are just so many options for outside resources. I felt with the MCAT, there was only a few to choose from, but when it came to the step 1, there was just there was just too many programs to choose from. So I think just picking a few, getting familiar with things, but realizing there's still a lot of time till step comes. So when you start med school, just focus on classes for a little bit and get comfortable.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think it's kind of in the back of your mind throughout all of your M1 year. I think especially now, our M2s are currently in their dedicated. So it's noticeable. You can see their stress and you know that it's just 1 year away from being yourself. But then putting it into perspective too, we all took the MCAT, we all passed it, we all did well. It was just another step in, taking what you've learned in the past and applying it to your future. And that's kind of the same way I currently look at step one, is it's just taking what I've learned and what I will learn for the next year and applying that to things that are relevant to my future as a physician. Like every one of those cases that appears as a vignette in step one could be a patient that you have in your future. So it's important that you understand it, not just for the test, but just like for being a good doctor in the future.
Well, and I think it's a good point too. Like one of the things I encourage my students is like all these study skills and the critical thinking you did for the MCAT and the review of the content is just a mirror of what you're going to be doing as you keep on going. You've got content to review, you've got critical thinking, and you're going to be continuing to study. So all these skills are continuing to be very, very useful. We've got a number of great questions, so I'm just going to start pitching them out there. Relative to or relevant to what we were just chatting about, Amanda, we've got how many times can you take the USMLE, and sort of, is there a best case and an okay scenario there?
So that's kind of a tough question to answer. What I've heard is you can take it twice. It doesn't look good if you take it more than once. And you can only take it a second time if you fail it the first time. So you want to aim to pass, and you want to aim to pass with flying colors. If something should happen, you can take it a second time. I believe 2 is the max.
And how do, so we just talked about step one at the end of your M2 year. There's additional exams. So can we speak to those just a little bit about that timeline and what their importance level is?
Like step 2?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So during third year, we have clinical rotations. And at the end of each rotation, you take, we take the COMAT, I believe, and it is an accumulation of all the different knowledge that you're gaining from each rotation. So for example, after your internal medicine rotation, you would take the internal medicine COMAT. And then at the end of year 3, you're going to take step 2, which is the PE and the physical exam. From what I understand, it's basically the OSCE or the FOSCE, what we were talking about. You have a standardized patient, and there are physicians watching you from like a mirror, like a video, and you run through a 14-minute office visit with the standardized patient. You could do a history of physical. You basically go through like a whole soap note. And for me, I'll be doing an osteopathic treatment as well.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Paige, we've got a question about how do you balance med school and social life? I know we talked about exercise and things like that, but friends, family, significant others, like how are you balancing some of those things?
Yeah, I think that's something that comes with time, and I'm still working on it. Personally, the various people that I want to spend time with do not all reside in the same nice little window of space. And so that's been tough. Because if I want to, give myself a weekend to spend, I kind of have to pick one group or one person that I am spending that with, because there's just not enough time to be traipsing all around. But I think that's something where like you have to be a little selfish and listen to the voice in your head and not necessarily the voices of those around you. What's best for you. If you need a weekend to just veg on the couch and not move and binge watch Netflix, like you need that, and you can't overextend yourself. And I think that's been really difficult for me as someone who is definitely a people pleaser. Like I want to spend time with my family. I want to spend time with my boyfriend. I want to spend time with my friends. There's only so much time that you have in excess. And so you kind of have to divvy that up in a way that makes the most sense for you while trying not to make everyone around you upset.
Yeah, Annika, what do you think about trying to balance expectations other people have for you versus what you need?
I just really try to utilize the weekend after those exams, because we have exams every 3 weeks. So on that third weekend after the exam, I take it completely off. A few times my mom's been able to come down to DC, or I'll make like special reservations or plans with friends in DC. And it just gives me something to look forward to, and feels like life's just kind of moving along that way.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear, do you have married classmates? Do you have classmates that have kids? We've got a wide variety, I'm sure, in the audience of folks at different parts of, different ages and different kind of family lives. And the question from the audience is it doable?
Yes. Yes and yes to both of those questions. I have several people in my class who are married, and let's see, one of them had a 1-year-old coming into medical school. He's in dental school, actually. And then another one had a baby about 3 months into medical school. So if that's really like something that's important to you and you have people around you who can support those goals, it is doable. Maybe not recommendable depending on the person. But if that's, like I said, if that's something that's important to you, like it exists, you would not be the first and definitely not the last.
Yeah, I don't have too many classmates. I don't know of any classmates off the top of my head that are necessarily married, but again, I'm sure if you utilize your time properly, I'm sure anything is doable.
Yep, I have a bunch of classmates who are married. I have a lot of classmates who have kids. I see someone asked if 50 years old was too old for med school. I actually have a classmate who's in her 50s, and she lived a whole very interesting life, and then she decided she wanted to come to med school, and she's rocking it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really a big change in the last 20 years or so, is that approach like that. I would say, 25 years ago, that would have been almost a completely closed door, right? But that recognizing the diversity of experience and diversity of being able to interact with patients and understand culture and language and just all different kinds of aspects of patient care has become much more to the forefront. And, average folks are coming, the average age of entering med school just keeps on creeping up. And so it's encouraging, I think, that as we've mentioned before, if you do decide to pursue a passion, if you do decide to have other life decisions, that's not a closed door. You can always come back around. And if medicine's the right thing, then we'll definitely be able to have folks who are willing to listen and to consider you as a future student. We've got some folks who are asking about the other end. So if you graduate college really young, ahead of the curve, have you all had any experience with younger classmates more in the 19-20 age range?
I have a couple classmates, I think there was like 2 classmates who turned 21 this year. So, they came in at 20, and I think definitely doable. Keep going, I guess, if you're younger, get it done fast.
Yeah, I came in and I was 21 when I started, and I'm one of the youngest in my class. I don't think we have any 19-year-olds. That's pretty impressive. If you're starting med school at 19, that's awesome. But yeah, if you are willing to work for it, it's possible.
Agree.
Yeah, I think it's really encouraging. I actually had a professor who graduated graduated med school from entering at 19 also. So I know someone who did it. She survived. But yeah, I think the whole thing for when we're thinking about it is there is a maturing and understanding that, just like you're talking about the benefits of some of the life experience and diversity, you've lived fewer years and you've had less experience. And so maybe a little humility goes a long way in some of these conversations. One negative conversation that I heard our admissions consultant tell us, so he was interviewing folks at University of Michigan Medical School, and he had someone who was quite young and quite accomplished at a young age, who was essentially like, I hung the moon, you are privileged to speak to me. And it was a huge turnoff. And despite having a huge MCAT score and a really strong GPA, that young man was not accepted to any medical schools. So definitely come in understanding and owning your accomplishments, but I think with a level of humility as well to go a long way. One of the things that we've seen come through also is talking about interview. And I've heard from you all that some folks have helped with the interviews, and then obviously each of you have been interviewed. What did you do? Like, how did you mentally prepare for the interview? And what do you think is important to communicate when you're sitting in front of someone and asking to go to their med school?
I think personally, perseverance is one thing I really look for when I'm interviewing candidates, because I think med school, like I've said, is just a marathon. It's really long. Some of the days, even if you're like the most passionate person about medicine, some of the days just feel really, really overwhelming. So I think if someone has like a passion outside of medicine that really feels they're wanting to be a doctor, they'll be able to keep going even on like those harder days. So that's something I think is really important. And also like when you're going on your interviews, just enjoy it, because you can go to like new cities for the first time, definitely explore the town and make sure it's somewhere that you would see yourself living for a number of years. And just enjoy those special trips as well.
Yeah, as someone who does interviews, I think one of the biggest things for me is like I want to see that you're human, that you have, a sense of humor, that you can relax. I can see on paper that you were an amazing student in undergrad, and you can tell me about that if you want, but like the interview is really your time to show who you are off of the paper, to show me your personality traits and show me what's important to you, that you haven't written. So I think my biggest piece of advice going into an interview would be to take a look at your application again, and then write like a list of like 4 or 5 things that you didn't have on your application that you really want the admissions people to know about you. Because you really only get like whatever 15 minutes to an hour to prove yourself to the person that you're talking to, and you want to use that time wisely. Don't use it reiterating to me what I read in your application an hour ago, and like we were talking about before, like showing your passion for whatever it is that you did, regardless of what it was, like that will set you apart from the average candidate as well.
Yeah, I think just echoing off that, I'd also say just like make sure you can be very specific about why that school, because by the time you get to that admission stage, every candidate there has the numbers and has the academics to be there. So making sure you can be really specific about why you'd be a good fit for that class and that particular school, and really advocate for yourself and why they should pick you.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be able to chat with you, each of you. I really appreciate your point of view and your honesty. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Really appreciate it. And I want to say thanks to everyone who joined us and were contributing such great questions to our overall discussion. We look forward to being able to just be a part of a community with you. So come and join us with some other great events. As I mentioned, we'll be having April 15th, a great session on really revising your personal statement, what's going to be important to communicate in it, and really strengthening your application. We have some other great events that are going to be coming up as well, so please do check those out. It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.